Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is an update on my summer propagation efforts here. These are the Lantana that were planted, that were rooted earlier in the season. And as you can see, they're pretty much growing all one direction. Anytime you have things pot to pot like this, and by pot to pot, I mean, the pot's right up against one another, they just kind of have to find a way to get to the light. And so they never grow completely uniform. And they need to be pruned and spread out at this point. And I'll just take them and cut them back. I can take about half the length off of these, just like that, and that'll encourage growth to come the other direction. And then these need to be spaced out, but every single one of them needs to be basically just cut in half, and you can cut it back to a leaf node. With these, some of these things, it just doesn't matter. This Lantana is not going to really matter where I cut it. Very much, but that's completely adequate right there. And it'll very quickly fill in the middle right there and be back in full bloom in 2 or 3 weeks and actually be a sellable item for me or ready to go in the ground. And so this was an item that could be rooted in the house and grown out in a single season into a sellable item or a plantable item or a usable item for a homeowner, whatever your backyard project is for your propagation. Pretty quickly. Most of these woody shrubs that you've seen me stick, the rest of the things you've seen me stick in this series and last year are things that are really going to need multiple seasons. And I always get the question about planting them, and it's, everything that I've stuck so far is pretty much rooted. It's not necessarily rooted completely, but it's rooted probably enough to plant the majority of it if I wanted to. The problem though is it's almost September, and if I was to put something into a 1 gallon pot in almost September, it's barely going to have any time at all to root in. And the advantage to me is not going to be great, but the disadvantage is going to be that now I have to winterize something in a much larger space. This right here is 50 plants in a tray. If I put these 50 plants into 1 gallon pots, it's going to cover a big giant space. So you can see it would take, I don't know if I'd get a lot of benefit out of it, and it would leave me having to protect a much larger space. So for me, on most of my rooted cuttings, I've always overwintered them, and I'll overwinter them in this house, and I'll put some sort of cotton cloth over them when it gets very cold. I'll winterize the pipes in here to make sure that nothing freezes in there and bursts, and it's all still usable when I come back to it in the spring. But just as an example, this is a Forsythia rooted cutting right here that's 3 years old. I've kept it in this tray for 3 years and they're still fine. It's not an ideal thing, obviously, but I rooted so many the time that I rooted these that I didn't need them. And I've left them in these rooted cells. And I would much rather overwinter them and hold them this way, because this is super, super root bound. Hopefully you can see that. It's just almost solid roots. But with something like this, I can go after this and I can fix all the problems with the roots wrapping around on this small plant, okay? If I put it into this gallon pot and held it in this gallon pot for a couple years, if I had extras, when I pull it out of that gallon pot to put it into a larger pot, it's really, really hard to break those roots apart. So I've always liked to hold things in small containers like this, and it's easy for me to overwinter them. It's easy for me to protect them. So the things that are in this house, I'm going to show you in just a minute, are rooted, and I'm going to leave them in there. There was a couple spots, there's a couple things in there, some Crape Myrtles that I let the leaves fall off of, and I didn't clean the leaves up on purpose, and I'm going to show you that they just rotted. I mean, that's what happens. My point about cleaning up, everything else in there I was cleaning up after, but I wanted to show you what happens if you don't clean the leaves up. There are things that can be rooted and grown out in a single season, and as long as I can get the pot pretty filled out, like I'll be able to do on these gallons before we get our first frost, I'm happy with that. But if it's something that I'm just going to be taking and sticking in a 1 gallon pot, and it's not going to do anything other than now take up more space, I'm going to hold it in this tray through the winter. So I never really had that much time this summer to stick a lot of things, but this was that Azalea flat that I stuck in the very first week, and these are just beautiful rooted cuttings. These are actually going to be shipped out in the spring to some people who asked me for it. It is an azalea from my grandfather's funeral. There's the Lantana flat. I had raced ahead to plant those Lantana that you just saw, and not all of them were rooted, but the rest of them have now rooted in. This was the Crape Myrtle right here, and these leaves were just all over them, but the leaves dropping onto the soil kept the soil too wet, and once that happens, they rotted off pretty quickly. There's one right there that's rooted just because a leaf never dropped on that cell, and leaf didn't drop off that particular one, and no problem at all on that one. Over here, here's some these Compacta Hollies and sky pencil hollies, and they've all got some resistance on them. I think they're just little fine roots in there at this point. By mid-fall, they should be really well rooted. These Vitex are completely rooted. These would definitely be plantable, these Vitex, that they're actually putting on growth right there. But again, I'm just gonna leave them in here for the winter. And our Confederate Jasmine is right here. Sorry, this is a really tight space I'm working in. Confederate Jasmine's rooted. This boxwood's rooted. The Japanese beautyberry right there already have really nice roots. I will, on something that's grown this much, I am going to cut those in half before I let them go to sleep. And then there's another example right there that was completely covered in leaves. I've thrown the leaves off over there, but that rotted off and very quickly. These had dropped some leaves, and I took them off, and you can really see the difference in things that are equally as easy to root. Both of these were just deciduous shrubs that should be super fast and super easy to root, but I let that side get too wet, and this side I allowed the soil to breathe a little bit. Well, this summer pulled me all over the place, and I definitely did not get as many things rooted in this backyard plant propagation series as I wanted to. I did build a really good house, and if you go back through the 2 summer series and invest in that little pipe bender that I have, or borrow one from somebody or whatever, this little house really will root cuttings, and I think you could probably do your seed germination if you were just doing a vegetable garden. Lots of different uses for this, including overwintering the things, some things that you maybe need to overwinter. So that part of the summer was definitely not a waste. And I only look in here every 3 or 4 days. That's how confident I am in how well this greenhouse is running and operating. I'm fairly confident in how well this mist propagation system works, and we were able to get some finished plants, and I got some azaleas rooted that I really needed to get rooted, because I'm going to send those out to some subscribers who had asked for them last year. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going to come back in a few weeks and show you how I'll winterize this greenhouse, how I get the water, make sure I get all the water out of the system, and how I'll overwinter these flats in the house using just basically a cotton cloth. Thank you very much for watching.